Do I need to update my will every time I move? My name is Andrew Ayers. I'm an estate planning attorney with offices in Edina, Minnesota and New York City. Today we're going to talk about a pretty common question I get from my clients, usually within a year or two after they sign their estate plan, and that's, it's time to move, and if I move, do I need to update all of my documents? Now, unfortunately, I've got to give you the typical lawyer's answer, which is, it depends. So in some cases, you do need to update your documents. In others, you're probably okay. The way we're going to look at this is really to look at, first of all, how far are you moving? So if you're just moving down the street in your hometown, then chances are you may not really need to update your estate plan. You may need to make an amendment here or there. But if you're moving to a completely different state, chances are you do either need to update your estate plan or make sure you're talking to an attorney in that state to find out what kind of benefits you could have from using an estate plan in that state versus your former state's estate plan. So first, let's look at a local move. So normally, if you're just moving down the street, you don't need to update your estate plan or overhaul the entire estate plan. So for example, if you're still within the same state, your same laws will apply if something happens to you. It'd be the same probate court, the same jurisdiction. These are statewide laws. They're not necessarily county specific. So just moving down the street or moving a town over doesn't mean that you need to update your estate plan automatically. However, if in your estate plan documents you specifically list your residence, let's say 123 Main Street, and your will says, I hereby bequest 123 Main Street to my cousin Sally, in that case, you would need to amend your will, because when you move to your new address, let's say 234 Smith Street, that 123 Main Street will no longer be your property and be able to distribute it under your will. Now, this is where my clients get nervous because we spend a lot of time putting together our estate plan documents, and it's a planned out process where they focus on all the details and they say, oh, what, I have to do a whole new estate plan and go through the whole situation, but you really don't. In that case, you could simply do a codicil to your will, which is a fancy legal term for an amendment to your will. If that specific bequest, that 123 Main Street, is in your trust, same principle. We don't have to do what's called restating your entire trust. We only have to do an amendment to the trust, and we can swap out the one property for the next. Now, if you're dealing with a trust and the trust owns the property, we want to make sure that when we do that transaction and sell 123 Main Street and buy 234 Smith Street, that we're doing all the correct paperwork for that trust. We don't want to miss any I's or not cross any T's when it comes to that kind of situation. But again, if we're just moving down the street, let's say you rent your apartment, you're moving 3 doors down, chances are you don't have to update all your estate plan documents. One document you may want to look at will be your healthcare documents. So if your healthcare power of attorney has your personal address in it, you may want to update that address just so that the doctors have the new address on file. But you don't have to necessarily do it the first day you move. The doctors can still find you. There's phone and other contact information in there. So if we're looking at a local move, you may or may not need to amend your estate plan, but it's probably a small amendment unless we have a specific bequest. And then the second situation is we're moving to an entirely different state. Now, if we're moving to an entirely different state, you may need an entirely new estate plan. So for example, a lot of my New York clients, when they move to California, my first bit of advice is talk to a local attorney in California about whether or not you need a new estate plan. Because New York and California have very different property regimes. They have very different ways that they handle people's estates. They have very different forms and very different documents. Now, when you create your documents, let's say you have a will that's in New York and then you move to Missouri. If you die in Missouri, your New York will is still valid. You worked with an attorney, everything is fine. But what you may be missing is there may be different forms of distributions that can be different ways that Missouri does estate planning, that the probate court works, than the New York courts work. So it makes sense to meet with a local attorney and find out whether or not you can take advantage of that new state's laws when you move to a different state. And this is a very state-specific thing. I can't give you a straight 50-state answer other than if you're moving to a new state, the best course of action is pay for that hour of time, sit down with an attorney in the new state, and say, here's my current estate plan. Should it be updated now that I live in this new state? And the part two to all this you want to look at is when we move to the new state, they may have new state forms that you would be able to use. So especially in the healthcare and the power of attorney areas, these powers of attorney can often have state-specific forms. When I draft them for my clients, we will often use a more generic form that can be used across state borders. But many times a specific state and those doctors and those banks in that state will want you to use a very specific form. In that case, it makes sense to meet with that local attorney and find out what do the forms look like, and is it easier just to update those forms, or can I use those forms from my old state? So you can try to do all this yourself, but this is definitely an area where I think you need to make sure you're talking to professionals. If you're moving to an entirely different state that may have a totally different property regime, it's not going to make sense for you to spend hours online trying to research and figure out whether it makes sense to have a will in the new state or a will in the old state, or what do we have to do with our trusts. So meet with a professional. If you talk to your financial advisor and you're moving to a new state, they probably even have an attorney that you can talk to. But if you're ready to get started and you have more questions, you can go to my website, andrewayers.com. There's a legal strategy session button on the main page. Click that and you'll be taken to my personal calendar. We can set up a 15 or 20 minute phone call to discuss where you are in the process, maybe where you're moving and what are some good questions to ask. Maybe you're moving to a state where I don't practice law. We can try to find you a local attorney there that you can speak with and at least give you some highlights so that you know the best options to protect you and your family with your planning documents.